Now is a great time to jump into the Elder Scrolls Online, whether you're brand new to the game or you haven't played in a while. Thanks to the release of the new Elder Scrolls Online Necrom chapter, and especially ESO's newest class, released as part of that chapter, the Arcanist. The Arcanist is definitely one of my favorite ways to play ESO right now, so much so that I've basically been doing everything in the game I possibly can on my Arcanist. Talking PvE content, PvP, solo play, and even groups. And not only can the Arcanist handle literally everything I've thrown at it so far, but the builds I'm about to show you are all extremely powerful, easy to set up, and most importantly, just really fun to play. Timestamps will be provided if you want to skip ahead to a specific build or rewatch a section, and every build I'm about to show you in this list also has its own written guide. Links for those will be down in the description. And a special thanks to Bethesda for sponsoring this video. If you'd like to learn more about the Necrom chapter and the Arcanist class, be sure to check out their link down in the description and the pinned comment. And for a limited time, you can even unlock extra rewards for your Arcanist by participating in the Ascent of the Arcanist in-game event, which is live right now through July 28th. Players that have reached at least level 10 with this powerful new class can log in today to claim a unique reward bundle. So be sure to check it out, and let's get to the builds. First up on our list is the basic beginner build for the Arcanist, using nothing but overland sets, so it'll be easy to get started even if you're new to the game. And this build has a solid combination of damage, healing, and survival, making it flexible enough for all types of content, but especially PvE solo gameplay like questing and overland, and when you get a little more experience, eventually PvE group content like dungeons. And for this beginner build, I've gone with a Magicka focus using the lightning staff on the front bar and the Inferno staff on the back. Though, just to be clear, the Arcanist class also does extremely well with a more stamina-based approach, like using dual wield, for example, which we'll see in some of the other builds on this list. Now, in terms of the sets, again, I want to use nothing here but overland sets for this particular build to make things as easy as I can. This means you can farm these sets yourself, or you can buy them from guild traders if you want. First up is going to be Mother's Sorrow, which is one of the most popular damage sets in the game, giving you tons of critical chance. And since the Arcanist class has a strong passive bonus to critical damage, upping your crit chance here just makes a lot of sense, helping that passive to trigger more often. I would recommend using 3 pieces of Mother's Sorrow on the jewelry and 2 pieces anywhere on the body. The next set that you want to work towards getting is called War Maiden. Now this comes from the Zone of Vardenfell, but again it is tradable if you don't have access to that chapter, or if you just want to purchase it quickly. Now I like this set on the Arcanist because it does a very specific buff, and that is to magic damage. Now no, I'm not talking about skills that cost magic to cast. This is something different. There's actually a specific type of damage in ESO called magic damage. This is often found on Templar abilities, Nightblade abilities, and now on many Arcanist class abilities. In fact, most of your offensive skills on the Arcanist, including the ultimate, deal this type of damage, making this a great set to pick up to increase your Arcanist damage, so I highly recommend it. In this case, I'm going to use 5 pieces of War Maiden on the body. And as a beginner build, I won't be using any monster sets or mythic items here, but you do still have room for 2 more set pieces. For this, I would recommend picking up 2 pieces Armor of the Trainee. For example, you could use this set for your weapons, and this will give you even more max Magicka and max health. Let's talk about skills next. Here on the front bar lightning staff, I'm going to be using Cephaliarch's Flail, Pragmatic Fate Carver, Chakram of Destiny, Escalating Rune Blades, and Inner Light. For the front bar ultimate, I went with Tide King's Gaze here. Now, as far as this ultimate goes, both morphs here are very powerful. But if you're less familiar with the game or you just want something easy, I would definitely recommend Tide King's Gaze. The reason for that is it's going to follow your target instead of you having to worry about aiming it at a specific spot on the ground. For the back bar Inferno staff, we've gone with a simple loadout of Elemental Blockade, Elemental Drain, both of these from the Destruction staff skill line. Then we've got Evolving Rune Mend as an emergency heal, Recuperative Treaties for our spell damage buff and some extra sustain, and Crux Weaver armor for a bit of extra defense plus Crux generation. The ultimate I've gone with here on the back bar is Sanctum of the Abyssal Sea. And this is going to be perfect for surviving when things get more challenging. For race on the beginner Magicka Arcanist, I would recommend Breton due to their cost reduction and magic recovery. It's honestly one of the best beginner races in the game due to that easy sustain. For food, you could use something like Witch Mother's Potent Brew, which will give you even more Magicka sustain. Basic magic potions are totally fine for this build, and for the Mundus Stone, I think the Thief is going to be your best option here to again focus on that critical chance. So that is the beginner setup. Again, if you have any questions, make sure to check out the description for more details on each build. if you want to create it for yourself. Speaking of simple builds, it literally does not get any easier than a 1-bar Arcanist. This build is called Crux Cannon, and it's perfect for both solo and group PvE content, but especially for soloing more difficult content like dungeons and arenas. This build does a ton of damage, but because it's a 1-bar build, you don't need to worry about complicated rotations or even bar swapping, which is amazing. This is definitely the easiest way to play the Arcanist. Now, I've gone with a stamina-focused build in this case, though you could also play as a Magicka-focused 1-bar Arcanist if you prefer. In this case, we're using dual-wield daggers to maximize our critical chance. Now, for sets, we're going to start with Deadly Strike. Simply put, if you like the Arcanist, then you need to get the Deadly Strike set as soon as possible. The reason Deadly Strike is so good on the Arcanist is that it buffs your main damaging abilities, including the Fate Carver Beam and your offensive ultimate. Seriously, the 15% bonus here is so good that I use it on many of my more damage-focused Arcanist builds if they use the Fate Carver Beam. The next set I would recommend is Order's Wrath. Now, as a crafted set, Order's Wrath is fairly easy to get, plus if you're not into crafting, it's easy enough to get someone else to craft it for you, or you can probably find this for sale on Guild Traders. Now, Order's Wrath is very similar to Mother's Sorrow, only it is better because it has critical chance plus critical damage and critical healing built in, all of which are some of the best set bonuses you can get your hands on in ESO. What really makes this build work though is the Mythic Oakensoul Ring from the High Isle chapter. And if you're not sure how to get this, I'll leave a guide for it right here, but basically this will supercharge your 1-bar build, giving you tons of helpful buffs that you wouldn't get otherwise since you're missing a whole other skill bar. And finally, with one set piece left over, you can plug in any one-piece monster set helmet or shoulder that you want. To get an extra bonus here, I prefer to use a light Slimecraw helmet for even more critical chance. Moving on to skills for the build, we're going to use Cephaliarch's Flail, Pragmatic Fate Carver, Evolving Runemend, Recuperative Treatise, Impervious Rune Ward, and our ultimate, the Tide King's Gaze. Now obviously, Pragmatic Fate Carver is going to be our main damage-dealing skills, and most of the other skills here are going to serve as support to build up our Crux in order to cast that Fate Carver at its full efficiency. I do like Impervious Rune Ward a lot. This is an amazing damage shield for solo content especially. The reason why I like it so much is it's going to use our off resource on the stamina build, in this case Magicka, meaning it's not really going to hurt our sustain at all, and it makes for a really great defensive tool. My preferred race on any 1-bar Arcanist, really, I would recommend Khajiit. Khajiit is an ideal Arcanist race if you prefer playing solo or in small groups because of their bonus stat pools, their recovery, and especially their bonus critical damage and healing. Keep in mind that the critical damage may eventually cap out in more coordinated groups because the Arcanist already has fairly high crit damage due to their class passives, and especially if you're using medium armor. So if your goal is to ultimately do endgame trials and push scores, I would probably go with Dark Elf instead. And in terms of consumables on this build, any basic stamina potion is completely fine thanks to the buffs we already get from the Oakensoul Ring. And the food I like here is Artaeum Takeaway Broth, though if you're on a budget, then Dubious Cameron Throne is completely fine too. Finally, for the Mundus Stone, I would recommend the Lover for the bonus penetration. And as I said when we covered skills, on this build, your goal is to get to your fully stacked Fate Carver Beam as soon as possible. Not only is this your strongest damage ability other than your ultimate, it's also a great defensive tool thanks to the shield it provides while channeling. Now with Recuperative Treatise active, you should be at 1 Crux nearly all the time, meaning you only need to generate 2 more Crux before beaming. So if my health is full, I can cast Cephaliarch's Flail twice to get there, or if I've lost a lot of health, then I can use Evolving Runemend to heal and generate Crux at the same time. Finally, after your beam is finished, you can then shield up again with Impervious Rune Ward. This will temporarily protect your health bar until you're ready to cast your next Fate Carver. It's honestly one of the easiest rotations in the game, and all the extra shielding on this build makes it very hard to die. So this build is awesome. Next up on the list is the Arcanist tank build that I'm calling the Rune Knight. Now, if you're interested in tanking at all in the Elder Scrolls Online, I highly recommend the Arcanist class. That's because overall it's got strong defenses, great self-healing, plus some group utility that really makes it work well as a tank. It's also probably one of the easiest and most natural tank setups I've played in ESO, while also being extremely fun to play with a lot of versatility. So in terms of item sets, there's obviously many options in ESO for tanks. This will be a basic setup, but feel free to adjust this based on your group's needs. First up, I would recommend using the Powerful Assault set. This comes from Imperial City. You can purchase it with Telvar stones. or you can also buy it from guild traders. This is always a solid option, as you can backbar this set using something like a frost staff plus 3 pieces of jewelry, for example. And this set is going to apply a unique damage buff to your group anytime you use an active assault skill, something like Vigor or Caltrops, both of which we use on this build. Now, for a body set, I would recommend another great option called the Turning Tide set. This will give your Arcanist tank easy access to a very powerful debuff called Major Vulnerability, one of the best group debuffs in the game, and this is something that typically is just sourced from Necromancers, so it's going to be a nice addition to your Arcanist tank build. Finally, for the monster set, you can run something like Tremor Scale here. This is going to give your group even more penetration, especially if you have stamina damage dealers in the group. This is another nice debuff set. Now, eventually, if you'd like to upgrade this build, since we are going to backbar the powerful assault set, you could upgrade your front bar sword and shield to something like an arena weapon. The Vandashran one-handed shield, for example, offers a lot of utility for tanks, but the build is also completely fine without it. Jumping into skills for the front bar, I recommend Heroic Slash, Silver Leash, Impervious Rune Ward, Runic Sunder, Rune of Colorless Pool, and Gibbering Shelter as the ultimate. On the back bar Destruction Staff, we're using Elemental Blockade, Razor Caltrops, Rune Guard of Still Waters, Echoing Vigor, and Crux Weaver Armor, with Aggressive Horn as the ult. All these skills are great, but Colorless Pool is such an amazing skill that I do want to mention it specifically. This gives you on-demand access to both Minor Vulnerability and Minor Brittle, which are amazing buffs to have access to as a tank. Plus, this skill can also stun non-elite enemies too, so that's very good as well. For the race on the build, I prefer Nord. That's for the extra ultimate generation and the armor. Though Imperial is also a solid choice for the stats and the cost reduction. And for food, we're using Bewitched Sugar Skulls. For potions, Tri-Stat potions are usually best. And for the Mundus Stone, the Atronach Mundus is going to be recommended here for the extra Magicka recovery. Now, playing an Arcanist lately has been one of my favorite ways to tank in ESO, not only because the class is fun like I mentioned, but because the additional interactions that you have with Crux makes things a lot more interesting in my opinion. For one thing, there's an interaction with the Runic Sunder taunt ability, which we mentioned earlier. We're going to have that on the front bar. Great skill too, by the way. It's a fully ranged taunt. So if you really want to save on bar space, you can run Runic Sunder instead of having both the Sword and Shield taunt plus a ranged taunt from the Frost Staff, for example. But when you have 3 Crux active, you actually get bonus damage reduction from slotting this Runic Sunder skill, which is going to be a great passive bonus you can get on the front bar. You can even get an extra heal from casting Impervious Rune Ward based on how many Crux you have active at the time. So tanking as an Arcanist actually feels a lot more strategic versus a solo or a DPS build, which for a more experienced player or maybe someone looking for a more in-depth combat style, this might be exactly what you want. Up next, let's talk about PvP on the Arcanist class, which does take a bit more preparation than your basic PvE build. But this particular PvP setup I've been using has given me some of the most fun gameplay moments I've had yet on this new class. You can play a PvP Arcanist in many different ways. This particular build is going to focus on debuffing enemies and applying status effects, which is actually one of the Arcanist's main class specialties. This is also a stamina-based Arcanist build using dual wield on the front bar for offense, with a sword and shield back bar for defense, and a mix of heavy and medium armor. So let's start first with the sets. For our main 5-piece set, we're using the Way of Fire. This is a tradable set that drops in the zone of Craglorn. Way of Fire procs off of basic weapon attacks, things like rending slashes, and it has a 2-second cooldown on the proc, which is actually very quick. Now, no, it's not a lot of damage, but it does help to apply constant pressure to an enemy, which is going to go a long way, especially with the amount of debuffs you can apply with this build. And now this is a heavy armor set as well, so we'll want to generally use 3 pieces of jewelry plus a heavy chest and heavy legs, though you could also go with 5 heavy body pieces if you want to be extra tanky. For the next 5-piece set, I like to run the Ward of Cyrodiil. This set applies Major Defile to your target, making it harder for them to heal and turning them into an easy kill for you and your group. Using this set makes this build a great option for taking down tankier classes that you find so often in PvP nowadays, like Dragon Knights and Wardens, for example. The Ward of Cyrodiil set is honestly very easy to get. I just bought this for a few thousand gold on Guild Traders. Obviously, the traits that you choose do make a difference here. I like to run a mix of well-fitted and reinforced. And for this setup, I use 3 pieces on the body, so boots, hands, and waist, plus 2 front bar weapons like daggers or swords. Now your choice of weapon glyphs is actually very important to this build as well. Here I recommend using a disease glyph on the main hand and a flame or a poison glyph on the offhand. The reason for this is that Arcanists have a bonus chance to proc status effects plus bonus status effect damage through the Psychic Lesion passive. Now thanks to this passive, the disease glyph, for example, will have a high chance to apply Minor Defile to your target for even more healing reduction, and a flame or a poison glyph will provide a solid dot for additional damage pressure. Finally, for the monster set, I highly recommend picking up the Balorg set eventually. When you use this in combination with the Tide King's Gaze ultimate, turns this build into a literal death ray, especially when you've already weakened, immobilized, and stunned your target in advance. Moving on to skills next on the front bar dual wield, we're using Cephaliarch's Flail, Whirling Blades, Rune of Colorless Pool, Rending Slashes, and Camouflage Hunter with the Tide King's Gaze ultimate, as we already mentioned. And on the back bar, I recommend Impervious Rune Ward, Audacious Rune Mend, Resolving Vigor, Recuperative Treatise, Crux Weaver Armor, and Gibbering Shield as your ultimate. As far as the Race Orc is probably my favorite choice for this build. You've got great stamina-focused stats, plus the extra run speed really helps out, since you generally want to be in melee range for most of our offensive attacks. For food on this build, a nice option is going to be the Jewels of Misrule. That's going to give you both extra Magicka and stamina recovery. Of course, if you can manage it, Tri-Stat Potions will also be very helpful for that sustain. And I also recommend using the Lover Mundus on this build, since the Arcanist does not have an in-class form of Major Breach, though you could also use a skill like Runic Sunder for a bit of extra penetration. Now, the different combinations of skills you can do on this build is where the Arcanist really starts to shine. For example, your main damage combo on this build starts with Rending Slashes to apply both versions of Defile, plus Poison or the Burning status effect from the offhand, not to mention a Snare from the Rending Slashes skill itself, plus the Fire Dot from the Way of Fire set. Next, you can use Cephaliarch's Flail to debuff them with Abyssal Ink, root them in place, usually forcing them to burn off some stamina. At this point, if my ultimate is ready, I would use it then, and then lock them in place with the Rune of Colorless Pool. This is an undodgeable stun. So trust me, once you master this combo, it is extremely nasty, and most players will melt in just a few seconds. But obviously the build is not all about offense. The Arcanist has some amazing survival tools too, once you master the rotation of shielding first and then healing second. Basically how this works is once you start taking damage, you're going to cast Impervious Rune Ward right away. This skill is amazing because it's actually 2 shields in one. It's a big upfront shield for 1 second, great for absorbing some of that burst damage, plus it then gives you a smaller shield for 6 seconds. After shielding, then you can heal up with Audacious Rune Mend, and you can even add Resolving Vigor on top of that if you're taking too much damage, basically getting back up to full health. Cycling through these 3 skills plus your defensive ultimate if you really need it makes this build so hard to kill in most situations, making it an amazing option for PvP with the Arcanist. Next up on our list is the Bow Arcanist, or the Bocanist if you prefer. Now, as good as this build is already, it's also getting a solid buff in ESO's new Update 39 patch, which improves bow damage at close range, making this build even stronger, which is crazy. For this build, we actually use the bow as both the main hand weapon and the backup weapon, so if you're looking for a flexible ranged Arcanist build but you don't want to use a destruction staff, then this might be the best build for you on this list. First up for sets, I recommend Deadly Strike, as this is going to buff our most powerful abilities, including Fate Carver and our Arcanist ultimate. As we saw earlier, a great set to combine with this is going to be the Order's Wrath Crafted set. This is going to give us tons of critical chance, as well as critical damage and critical healing. Though you could substitute this with another Overland set, something like Briarheart for example, which has a strong boost to weapon and spell damage, plus some extra healing. Now finally, in terms of a monster set, my favorite option for bow builds is actually the Stormfist set. This also comes from the base game, so it's fairly easy to pick up, and it provides a powerful ranged proc, plus bonus stamina recovery. Moving on to the skills for the Bow Arcanist, we're using Cephaliarch's Flail, Pragmatic Fate Carver, Inspired Scholarship, Writhing Rune Blades, and Camouflage Hunter with the Languid Eye as our ultimate. Remember that with the Languid Eye morph, this does do more damage than Tide King's Gaze, but it also requires that you place this skill on the ground, so you're going to need to be careful where you aim it. Now on the back bar, the skills I recommend are going to be Poison Injection, Endless Hail, Razor Caltrops, Channeled Acceleration, and Reconstructive Domain, with Sanctum of the Abyssal Sea as your defensive ultimate. In terms of race, we already mentioned the benefits of choosing Khajiit, so that's what I'm going to recommend here, as well as the Thief Mundus for the increased critical chance, and Lavafoot Soup for the increased stamina recovery. Now, how you play this build is actually very simple. Our backbar skills will be primarily focused on buffs and debuffs, as well as our two main bow skills, that being Poison, Injection, and Endless Hail. Usually you'll start your rotation by buffing up, and then dropping those bow skills along with Razor Caltrops to debuff the enemy's armor. And once your buffs and your dots are set, you can then swap to your front bar bow, which is where we're going to have most of our Arcanist damage skills waiting. Now, as you saw, I have loaded my front bar with all of my Herald of the Tome abilities except for one. You can actually flex in that one as well. And I've done this for a good reason, especially if you like solo play. The reason for that is the Arcanist passive called Splintered Secrets. This gives you nearly 1,000 offensive penetration for each Herald of the Tome ability slotted. So with anywhere from 5 to 6 Herald of the Tome abilities active on your front bar, that's basically like running an extra Lover Mundus stone for free. All in all, this build plays and feels incredibly good. It will be gaining even more power in the next update, thanks to those bow changes coming in update 39. So if you're interested in the bow playstyle on the Arcanist, I definitely recommend you check this one out. Nearing the end of our list of the top Arcanist builds is number 2, the Unkillable Magicka Arcanist. I've created builds like this for every class now in the game, with the focus being high survivability, including strong defenses, powerful healing capability, and also a strong mix of damage and sustain. This is basically going to be your all-around solo build on the Arcanist class, capable of soloing the toughest content in the game, including world bosses, world events, dungeons, and of course solo arenas. I also went with a more thematic focus on this build, choosing to focus on the Arcanist specialty of channeling magic. We already saw how skills like Fate Carver are extremely powerful, but when you also include some additional sets that provide even more buffs to those channeled skills, that's when this build really becomes unstoppable. This build and more are available right here on YouTube as part of our Tier 2 channel membership, aka the Elite Squad. Our Tier 2 channel members get access to over a dozen members-only builds and guides, plus more members-only perks like early access to videos and members-only Discord. So if that sounds good to you, just click on that join button for more information. And let's talk about our number 1 Arcanist build on this list, the Easy Stamina Arcanist DPS. So I've mentioned this before in other videos, but I really think the Arcanist class is the easiest and the most powerful class right now in the game when it comes to dealing damage. The build I'm about to show you here, for example, can parse over 110k DPS on a trial dummy, and that's without using any trials gear sets at all. So if you're looking for an easy way to deal damage in ESO while also having a simple rotation, then this is going to be the build for you. Now, after playing the class for a while, it's pretty clear to me that the Arcanist was designed to have a certain flow and a simplicity in combat that just feels good. Not only is the class really fun to play, but it does make endgame content more accessible to new and less experienced players, which I think is a good thing. Now, in terms of sets, as I mentioned, you don't even need trial sets to do insane damage with an Arcanist. The Deadly Strike set, for example, that I showcased earlier, buffs the majority of our damage sources, including the Fate Carver Beam, any dots, as well as our ultimate. So this is going to be a great start to any Arcanist DPS. Now you can also pair the Deadly Strike set with another popular damage set called Pillar of Nirn on your back bar, which procs another powerful damage over time effect. And then you can even add in things like an arena set, such as the Black Rose Prison daggers on the front bar for another damage boost. But what really pushes this build over the top is the new Velothi Mage's Amulet. This mythic item from the Necrom chapter seems to be designed specifically with the Arcanist class in mind, as this increases your overall damage, but with the downside of reduced light and heavy attack damage, which on the Arcanist class isn't really that big of a downside, since if you're playing the Arcanist right, you should be spending most of your time channeling your beam for damage instead of worrying about light and heavy attacks. Now for skills on the build, I recommend a dual-wield front bar using Cephaliarch's Flail, Exhausting Fate Carver, Deadly Cloak, Barb Trap, and Camouflage Hunter with the Flawless Dawnbreaker ultimate. On the back bar, using two-hander, I recommend Stampede, Carve, Fulminating Rune, Camouflage Hunter Inspired Scholarship, and the Languid Eye ultimate. Dark Elf is going to be the recommended race for this build, along with the Thief Mundus, and Lavafoot Soup is another great option for the food buff here. Also, normal stamina potions are completely fine with the way we've set this build up, though you will be able to squeeze out a little bit of extra DPS by using something more advanced like Heroism Potions. But there you have it, 7 extremely fun and powerful ways to play ESO's newest class, the Arcanist. If you need any more help setting up these builds, Remember to check out my notes in the description for links to written guides for each and every one of them. Special thanks again to Bethesda for sponsoring this video. You can learn more about the Arcanist class and the new ESO Necrom chapter by clicking the link below in the description and the pinned comment. And thanks again to all of you for watching this video. I hope you're doing well, stay safe out there, and I will see you around in the next one.